Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorenzo Kilgangrandi. I am the director of the City Diplomacy Lab, one of the three co-hosting organization of this panel, together with Cités Unis France and UCLG. So I will briefly introduce today's panel. We have the chance of having a very interesting mix of practitioners and experts working on the working for and in gender equity and urban metabolism. So we will have the participation of Miss Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, the mayor of Freetown in Sierra Leone, Miss Céline Papin, which is the deputy mayor at Bordeaux, vice president at the Bordeaux Metropolis, and president of Latin America and Caribbean Dynamic at Cités Unis France. We will also have Ms. Elisa Pereira Nunes, deputy mayor of the city of Tours in France, delegate for gender equity at Cités Unis France. The participation from the room from the World Urban Forum of Dr. Diana Rodriguez Franco, Secretary of Women at the city of Bogota, the capital of Colombia, and connecting from Zoom, Ms. Julia Munro, the focal point on gender equality for United Cities and local government. And I myself am Lorenzo Kilgangrandi, the director of the City Diplomacy Lab, which is a research lab hosted by the Columbia Global Centers in Paris. So it is really a pleasure to be here with you today in a hybrid way. Thank you very much to the co-organizer, UCLG and the Cité Unis France, and to our distinguished guests. Well, my goal today is, in fact, to give you a brief overview of the topic in question, urban metabolism and gender equity. You can, in fact, you can stop sharing the slide. I think you can, Jemima, just a technical communication. We can start back from you can stop sharing, in fact, the screen. Perfect. So here we are. Well, as I said, I would like to offer you a brief overview of the very specific, very peculiar approach of the City Diplomacy Lab to the topic in question. The City Diplomacy Lab has a very peculiar approach, in fact, because it parallels the classical theoretical approach of research centers, and it adds the practical components of the practitioners of the international action of cities. And this is because we strongly believe that there is a very important gap between the theory and the practice to be bridged. And we put the academic research at the service of the practical action of cities. And so there is a lot that has been done by research and by practice in this complex relationship between place, space, and gender. In fact, research since the 1970s has revealed the contradictions regarding the spatial configuration and functioning in relation to gender. This contradiction, in fact, takes the form of very profound inequalities. Indeed, there is, in fact, a number of barometers that have been developed to assess and identify those inequalities. We can see, in fact, one of the most important one relates to the professions and professional contexts that have the main responsibility in shaping and reshaping the technical functioning, the built environment, and the public space of a city. So if we go towards the fields of architecture, urbanism, engineering, transportation, energy, water, sanitation, and waste management, we can see that the vast majority of the people working in these sectors are, in fact, men. This means that, unfortunately, cities are designed and structured according to the expectations and goals of only half of what we can consider the urban body. Sadly, this obstacles, this inequality is also very present in the framework of local governance. We know that, in fact, around the world, globally speaking, we have only 20% of mayors female mayors worldwide. Of course, there are countries that have a more positive, a more equal stats, but in fact, generally speaking, it's 20%. 1 every 5 mayors in the world is female. And it is a little bit better if we consider, in fact, that the local government legislative bodies, we have 36% of female, which is a little bit better, in fact, than parliament worldwide, 24.9%, but still we are, of course, far from equality. On the other hand, we have, of course, a very important role of women leadership, in fact, in many sectors, including care-related sectors and associations, NGOs, especially, unfortunately, the unpaid social work, as we will focus with, thanks to the contribution of Secretary Diana Rodriguez in a few minutes. So by using the urban metabolism approach, these inequalities can be read under the idea that the city itself is a complex but unique natural ecosystem. It can be considered as a whole. And it is very useful to identify this perspective because a discrimination, in addition to being morally deplorable, is also so in the perspective of the urban functioning. So city works much worse, of course, because a part of its body is in fact prevented from action. The city is seen as a set of very diverse heterogeneous flows, such as flows of people, goods, services, energy. And those flows are in fact driven by many variants of socio-demographic, regulatory, economic, and cultural nature. So this is a very difficult approach, understandably. To talk about urban metabolism, we need expertise from very diverse number of sectors of research, the human sciences, the art sciences, of course, to put together an interdisciplinary and holistic view. But to sum up and to be more concrete and look at the action, the urban metabolism is very effective in combating these inequalities for the good of the entire ecosystem. And this has been very evident by research in the economics perspective. So there are several studies that demonstrate that in publicly traded companies, where there is a critical mass of women in the boards, we have a greater performance and innovation capability. So this is something that performs, economically speaking, better. This is one only of the 3 components of sustainability, economic sustainability. We can focus, and we should focus always, of course, on the other 2, and starting from the fight to climate change, the environmental sustainability. Well, unfortunately, the research shows that women, and particularly poorer and ethnic minority women, are among the main victims of the effects of air pollution. And the same, by the way, is also related to the access to urban green space and the general feeling of space, of safety, in the urban environment. But fortunately, and this is the added value of this panel that I have the honor of being part of, there is this global leadership of a growing number of cities, and some of them are presented, some of the most recognized leaders are in fact presented today, that have this bold policy agenda, which is able to create a link between the local policy goals and the true and full social, economic, and environmental sustainability and justice. So there are many leaders in climate action, and I am happy to say that many leaders in municipal climate action are in fact women. This has been proven by the Climate Summit hosted last year in April 2021 by the US President Joe Biden. There have been 2 panels in this Climate Summit, one for national level and intergovernmental level. There were only 2 women, Angela Merkel, the then Chancellor of Germany, and Miss Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission. But when there was this second panel of subnational part, well, all the speakers were women, and we are not surprised, in fact, as we know that most of the leaders in this in the field of environmental and city diplomacy are in fact female. So we have the chance today to listen to some of the most inspiring female leaders leading their cities towards a more equal and sustainable future. Personally, I'm here today to get inspired, and I support the spread, of course, of this inspiration through the tools of city diplomacy. Thank you very much. And I would like to check if now we can hear from the room with the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We can.
Oh, okay, thank you, Lorenzo. So now,
for solving the technical issues, and once again, thank you to the
yes,
participants
they
for
did
their
a great work. Okay, thank you. So now I asked Miss Céline Papin, so the vice mayor of the city of Bordeaux, to introduce the session. So and to try to make the session in good order. So okay. So Miss Céline Papin, you've got the floor. It's okay. It's okay. If not okay, you can come here.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, it works. Okay, just a few words. First, to introduce myself. So I'm Céline Papin, Deputy Mayor of Bordeaux. Actually, I am trying to substitute my colleague, Elise Pereira-Nunes, who, for her, it was not possible to be with us today due to imperative reasons, but I hope she will join us by internet, by Zoom, in a few minutes. As Lorenzo said, I think, well, I'm very happy to be with you today because we can see that there are more and more female local political leaders, and I think that's a very good thing, of course, to change also the way of thinking public policies, and especially local public policies. In France, we have more and more female political leaders, thanks to laws that oblige actually political parties to introduce female leaders in political lists. And in my example, in Bordeaux, for example, there is our first deputy mayor is in charge of climate action, budget, and gender equality. And I think it's quite an important thing to have in mind, that those three aspects are very, very crossed. So, and we will see probably with the examples of the testimonies in this round table. Okay.
So they can see you. Yes, it's better. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So we will just after. We are very sorry for technical problems. It's still very complicated with and we have been used with COVID times, but it's still a little bit complicated. So I propose now maybe to have the testimony of Bogota, if you don't mind, because this way we can switch between distantful and presential. And thanks to after your example, your testimony, we will see a video from the mayor of Freetown, I think. That's it, Constance? And then a first round of questions, because the idea is also to have an interactive, of course, session with you.
Better if I stand right there. You can introduce yourself.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. As it was mentioned, I'm Diana Rodriguez, and I'm the Secretary for Women for the City of Bogota. And perhaps the question that was posed was, what has been the gender approach adopted by Bogota? How has Bogota been able to really implement gender strategies? And I guess, let me begin by saying that Bogota has, for its first time in history, the first elective women mayor. So Mayor Claudia Lopez was elected, we started in office on January 1st of 2020. So just a few months before the pandemic broke out. And she's, as I mentioned, the first woman mayor. And when she took office, for her, it was very clear. She said, we have to go beyond the symbolic aspect of me being the first woman mayor. It has to translate into real, clear actions. It has to translate into transforming the lives of the women in the city. Bogota is a city of 8 million people, of which a little over half are women. And so what we said is this has to go beyond a few programs. This has to be a real transformation, both within the city government and outside for women. And so let me just mention a few strategies. And perhaps I'm going to mention a few, and I can mention more during our conversation, and perhaps as a result of questions from the public. So there was a very clear two-pronged strategy. One was we're going to strengthen the Secretary for Women, and that means both budget-wise and program-wise. But the second decision was it can not only be the programs and decisions made by the Secretary of Women Affairs. Bogota has to take a general and mainstreaming approach to gender equity, which means we need every single sector to be asking itself, what is the gender gap? What is the gender issue at the core of the issue I want to address? And perhaps that's the underlying question that drives our city development plan and our Bogota. It's only a 4-year term and there's no re-election. I think this is important given short-term, like quick policies that had to get on the ground quickly. And so when we were putting together our development plan which was presented before the city council in April of 2020, we said every single sector, so the transportation sector, the health sector, the education sector, we all had to ask ourselves, what is the core gender problem at the core of what I want to address, right? And so that's how we put together a 4-year program. And so let me tell you what that really in concrete translated into, and let me give you 5 examples, or perhaps 6. One of them really related to the issue of the World Urban Forum is a clear housing policy with a gender target. So there's a gender housing policy in which we offer conditional subsidies to women, and conditioned on, so it's subsidies for rent, but they're conditioned on the fact that women have to save a percentage of what they earn of that subsidy, of what they receive of that subsidy, and be saving it for then later get a credit and access to housing. So it's a way for a year, they receive subsidies, a percentage, they save it, and those savings serve as the platform to then have access to credit and access to housing, with 3 female populations as the target. First, female victims of the armed conflict. So Colombia had a 50-year-long armed conflict, and the main victims are women. And so there's a clear targeted policy of favoring them primarily. Second, women that are victims of domestic violence, in particular, women who've been at risk of feminicide, and transgender women. So they are the 3 key beneficiaries of this housing policy. And the whole objective is to close the gap in home ownership and in property ownership, which is a very clear gender gap, not only in Bogota, but in Latin America and in many developing countries in which home ownership is seldom in head of women, but in mostly men. The second policy the second issue I would like to mention is we're about to launch an integrated transport system. So of course, Bogota has an integrated transport system, but there's a new set of buses of all the electric buses, and the new public operator of those buses is going to be ran and operated and driven by women. So all women. So only women will be driving those buses, and not only driving the buses, they're being trained right now to be the drivers of those buses, but also trained in the technical aspects of maintaining the buses, the electricity of the buses. So having the first fully female-driven public transportation system. That's the second, a second very clear target of gender approach in the transportation sector, which has been a highly masculinized and man-dominated field. Second, in terms of justice and access to justice, there's a very clear goal in having a gender perspective to the access to justice. And so we put together what we call houses of justice, in Spanish, casas de justicia. And basically what those houses for justice are, as we bring together in one place the different institutions that women, especially women that are victims of domestic violence or other forms of violence, need in one place, to avoid them being sent from one place to the other, right? As what usually happens, no, your issue is not dealt here. It's that other institution that takes care of your case. No, it's not here, then to the other place, just to avoid being sent from one place to the other, and to guarantee and to put all the justice and access to justice institutions in one place. We put together these houses for justice. And so we offer legal guidance and advice and free counseling and free legal representation, and having both the justice institutions of the local level and the national level in one place. And there's several of these. We have for now 4 of these integral houses of justice throughout the city. A fourth strategy has been a gender equality and equity budget tracker. So we all know that cities, if we do want to increase and if we want to close the gap, the gender gap, regardless of what issue related to urban affairs, we need money to do it. And we need that to be reflected and to be tracked and to be monitored. And so we introduced for the first time in Bogota the gender equality and equity budget tracker, which allows us to know that we're implementing in each of the sectors, we're investing resources to close gender gaps. So not only are resources invested in women, we track whether they're closing gender gaps. And a fifth strategy has been the care system. So the care burden, taking care of children and of people with disabilities who need care, and the elderly who need support, the care burden has been overwhelmingly in the shoulders of women everywhere in the world, but very noticeably in Latin America. And Bogota is not the exception. And so we designed and implemented for the first time a care system. And what is the care system? It articulates existing and new services to address the high care demands. So of course there were some care services in Bogota before, as there were child care services, and there were services for the elderly or elderly homes, but they were seen as just a disarticulate set of services, and they did not have a gender approach. What does that mean? They were not thought of from the perspective of caregivers, but from the perspective of care receivers. And we switched the lens. We asked ourselves, what would it mean to have a care system that articulates existing and new services, but thinking, and as the main beneficiaries, caregivers, female caregivers who've had disproportionate care burden. And because of that care burden, they've left aside most of their life goals. So they've have to quit high school or dropped out of college, or they never learned how to ride a bike because that was only for the men in the family. And so what have women left aside? What have they been forced to renounce to and give up because of the care burden? And those are the services that we're offering. So the care system articulates those existing and new services to address the elevated care demands in a co-responsible and shared responsible fashion between the city government, the national government, the private sector, households, and communities, with the objective of giving time to women. Time for personal development, for self-care, to participate in politics, to continue their life projects, with the overall goal of what we call the 3 R's, which are to recognize care and caregivers. It's very common, and it's still a very common cultural question. What does your mother do? And the most common question is, no, she doesn't do anything. What do you mean she doesn't do anything? No, she's at home. at home all day. Yeah, but what does she do at home? No, she takes care of so-and-so, and she washes and cleans and cooks and goes for medicines, and she's in charge of my grandmother and my grandfather and my uncle, but she doesn't do anything. So that's a very common response. So we wanted to start with a cultural change aspect of saying we have to recognize caregivers and the role of care in society and in families. And so that's our first goal. Our second goal is to redistribute care, starting between men and women, but as I said, between the public sector, and others sharing the care burden. And ultimately, the third R, meaning reducing care and reducing the care burden so women can actually have the time. And how do we come about that? How does it actually operate? Mainly through something we've called care blocks. And so care blocks are physical spaces in which we bring together services not only for caregivers, but at the same time for those who require care. So in a care block, in that physical space, which has an 800-meter diameter, more or less, so you can access all services by foot, while we take care of those who women normally take care of, so for instance, children, a grandmother or a woman or can at the same time be finishing high school in a flexible manner, can be actually washing the clothes in a public laundry, which it's not very common to have in Bogota, and women still wash by hand. So imagine that, the time that's consumed in that. And so the goal of care blocks is, with an idea of proximity and flexibility and simultaneity, is to offer services for women, especially educational services, recreational services, and income generation services, while we take care of those they care for. And at the same time, we also have cultural transformation workshops. We have, for instance, Care School for Men, where men learn how to iron, how to give a bottle, how to cook, because we need to, there's a whole cultural transformation underlying aspect of all of this in order to be able to recognize care and redistribute care. And for now, Bogota has 10 of these care blocks, and we've offered more than 150,000 services up to now. And so let me leave it at that so we can continue the conversation. Thank you.
Ah. Thank you very much for your presentations, very inspiring. We can see that you have much ambition, and that's quite impressive. I will maybe give the possibility to Elise, that has joined us finally, if she can maybe do her presentation. Elise, can you open your microphone? Yeah, I give you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. So yes, I'm Elise Pereira-Nunes. I'm very sorry for not being with you all today, and I really want to thank my colleague from Bordeaux, Céline Papin, who is very active as a member of Cités Unies France Gender Work Group. And thank you so much for stepping up at the last minute and doing such a wonderful job at moderating the session. Thank you, Céline. I also want to thank all the members of the panels and to all the participants in Katowice and online for sharing your insights, your experiences, and contribution to this very important discussion. Cités Unies France Gender Work Group was created in 2020 at the request of its members. Indeed, French cities and local governments that wanted to work together and with their international partners asked for this group to advance gender equality and inclusion in all matters of public policies. And obviously, this has something to do also with, the end of the COVID crisis and all the, for example, domestic violence that emerged from this terrible context. Regarding the philosophy of the work group, first, we have a strong belief in the role of local governments play in advancing such issues locally, and in answer to the requests of our citizens and the different, associations and different groups of activists. So all parts of the population that wants the local governments to be involved in those topics. We also believe in the efficiency of peer learning and the sharing of inspiring best practices And we know that it's also the strength of our collective voice to advance gender mainstreaming at all levels of governments. So we started from the observation that even for the most convinced among us, advancing gender inclusion requires knowledge, methods, and processes. So we also have a strong political will and a critical political will, but it must be followed by meaningful action, starting with our own institutions to ensure that gender is systematically factored into our public policies. So the gender group force therefore mobilized expertise to create training sessions for the members of the group, notably on how to enroll in our institutions with fellow representatives, public agents, in gender-sensitive public actions locally and within our partnerships abroad. Another action was to create a directory of French cities involved in gender mainstreaming in their local and international policies in order to facilitate peer learning, disseminate best practices and inspiring actions, and encourage other local governments in France and abroad to embrace the issue and take action. So for the past 18 months, the group has addressed and explored many fields of local public policies, such as action against gender-based violence, gender-inclusive education, gender-sensitive economic development and job creation, and obviously actions and ways to advance gender inclusivity in the very fabric of our cities. And just as we are doing today, we have worked on such topics as women invisibilization in the public space, fighting against this invisibility and making them visible, to also encourage role models for children and girls. We also have worked on gender bias in usages, sociability and mobility in our cities, and how to address and mitigate them. So we share practical solutions and initiatives on such topics as gender-sensitive budgeting, data collection to inform decision-making, efficient ways to enroll and involve women in public policies. The group has also actively participated in advocacy work at the national and international level to push for the inclusion of a gender-sensitive approach in all agendas. To give you an example, I was able to go to COP26 and to talk about climate issues and gender issues and how they're intertwined. And that was a very interesting approach to have regarding climate change and who is mostly impacted by this change. In regards gender inclusivity in our cities and in the urban agendas, we are aware that the topic has been explored many times. We're also aware that despite the issues being repeatedly identified, it is still too often overlooked and progress slow. So meaning that repetition is still necessary, advocacy is still crucial, proactive resolution and commitment is still very much needed. And we still have to collectively work towards a more inclusive future. Which is why the Gender Work Group has joined the collective movement and contributes to the international discussion led by UCLG on the feminist municipalism movement. It is also why we remain committed, together with our friends and colleagues in other networks of local governments around the world, to keeping this conversation front and center at all levels of governments and in all aspects of public policy. And to finish, I would like to say that the theme of the World Urban Forum is transforming our cities for a better urban future in the context of Sustainable Development Goal 11, making cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And our session today aims at contributing to that goal. And it is a great joy and pleasure to walk together with so many cities in the right directions. Thank you very much to all, and thank you, Bogota, for this very inspiring testimony.
Thank you so much, Elise, for your testimony and for your commitment. Now I propose a video presentation by the mayor of Freetown, at the capital of Liberia. So she will expose the challenges that she faces in her city.
Okay. So I'll try to put the video. So I hope it will be okay, but I think it will be okay. So.
That I can't join you in person at this year's World Urban Forum, but I'm really glad to be able to join you on this panel virtually to talk about a subject which is so important: how women fit into and how women must be included in urban development and planning. Historically, they've been absent, but in our situation, it's not so much that women have been absent from the planning, it's the planning has been absent.
I would like to thank all the participants, both in Katowice, the World Urban Forum, and online.
Because not only is the planning not there, not only is the planning, could the planning be biased, but the planning actually is not there. And that means for many women, access to water, access to healthcare, access to energy, access to education facilities are missing. Because with the lack of planning comes a fragmentation of service delivery, an absence of service delivery, and the most vulnerable are the ones most impacted, inevitably women. So the way forward for us as a city, the tackling of introducing urban planning, land use planning, building permitting, this sadly is something which requires government approval and which we have not been able to attain yet. But the advocating continues, and we're hopeful that we will get there in the not so distant future. But in the meantime, we've got to find workarounds to ensure that tackled. So on the one hand, it's what do we do to improve access, even in an individual case-by-case basis, without the luxury of having a comprehensive urban plan? How do we ensure that women at community level are able to access water, able to access healthcare? This means improvements in off-network water solutions. We are building water points across the city, particularly in formal settlements. We've introduced rainwater harvesting systems. We're really proud of a project we've just launched, which is particularly focused on women and water, making not just the access to water available, but the management of the water system available to women, thereby giving a livelihood. The same is true of work we're doing from the perspective of job creation, whether it's having women at the forefront of our urban farming activities, or ensuring that women are part of the people who are acting as tree growers. So I suppose in a way, what we've sought to do is to deal with the challenge, even without the mandate of urban planning. But in doing so, we've also been planning for a dispensation of urban planning that puts women at the heart of it. To do this, or among the things that we've done in respect to this, as a city, Freetown is part of change, the city's hub and network for gender equity. And we have been very deliberate in, first of all, assessing what we're doing as a city council in terms of our own policies, our own employment of women, what does the status quo look like, and then going beyond that and showing that in alignment with our Transform Freetown objectives, that we're putting women and participation of women, mainstreaming them into our initiatives, their participation, their voices, and the implementation. So I suppose as we go through this topic and as other presenters make contributions, there's a range of challenges. Women needing to be part of the discourse within planning, needing to be part of the direction of planning. In the absence of planning, women needing to be part of, participating in solutions, and ensuring that those solutions are really looking at the most vulnerable, which means by definition, they're looking at access to service delivery by women and girls, and then taking a more long-term view, moving from a perspective of saying no planning challenges, making sure we go do that through a gender lens, now saying, even as we build the structures and anticipate that we will soon as a city be able to implement land use planning, zoning, building permits, all of these critical urban management tools, because we've got the experience already, because the focus is there, because through the work of change, we are already assessing our own 4-year track record to see how well we've been doing on gender. As we plan into the future, we're doing so with that focus on ensuring that our urban planning, our land use planning, our policies around environmental protection, around sanitation, around access to water, transport, urban mobility, livelihood generation and creation, that these all have women at the heart of it. It's so important because the future of our city really depends on the well-being and the health of our residents. And women form a key part of that. 51%, they count, and we're making sure that filters through in what we do. It's at Freetown City Council and in #Transform Freetown. Thank you and have a great World Urban Forum.
So finally, it has worked. So I don't know if you have some reactions or questions, especially to, for example, the representative of Bogota, but also to Elise, who is still, I think, yes, with us. Well, if not, I can begin. If you don't mind, I have a question to Bogota, because I was, well, very interested in one point that you focused on, the question of time. And it is true that, well, what we observe in our local public policies, and especially in all the participatory tools that we implement in our local territories, we really have the difficulty to touch women, or to have women getting involved in our round tables, in all the participatory systems we try to implement. And of course, because they have less time to be involved in those. So I was wondering if you have developed some public policies especially dedicated to this question.
So thank you.
Should I stand over there?
So thank you, Celine. Indeed, the whole purpose of developing and putting into action a care system, and specifically the care blocks, are to address time poverty. So let me give you a figure. Bogota is a city of 8 million people, as I said. For a little over 4 million are women. And of those women, 30%, that is 1.2 million women, devote themselves entirely to unpaid care work. So they devote themselves entirely to cooking and cleaning and taking care of the elderly and taking care of children, all in an unpaid fashion. In fact, if that care work were paid, it would represent 13% of the GDP of the city and 20% of the GDP of the country. So what that excess care burden translates into is time poverty, right? Why? Because when the average time these 1.2 million women devote to care are 10 hours per day, that means no economic autonomy. 30% of them report having no time for free time or self-care. 21% of them have chronic mental and physical health conditions derived from the care burden. And 70% of them have reached a maximum of a high school degree. So all of this are just indicators of severe time poverty. And when you have that time poverty, well, it's very difficult to participate, as you were saying, Celine, in political activities, or even in self-care, or in pursuing higher degrees of education, right? So the care system is designed to address time poverty. And that's why we switched the focus. It's not only that care services for the people who require care, for care receivers like children in particular under the age of 5, or the elderly who require care, those care services are very important. But we are sure that what we have focused on is what are those services that women need that they've lacked because of that time poverty, because they had to drop out of high school, for instance. And so there's women at the age of 40 who dropped out of high school, but they want to finish high school. So we offer the possibility of finishing high school in a flexible manner, while at the same time and in proximity and with flexibility, we take care of those who they care of. So while a 40-year-old woman or a 45-year-old woman comes into one of our care blocks, she can finish high school in a flexible manner while we take care of her grandchild or her child or the relative she takes care of, right? So that's what we aim to do. We aim for women not to constantly have that debate of should I be giving services and be sure I can take the person I take care of to those services, or should I go and engage in services for myself? We try to go beyond that that debate, which we all face all the time, by providing services in the same space. Also, this contributes to addressing time poverty because it reduces transportation requirements. Women are not going from one place to the other, taking the people they care for, and at the same time going from one place to the other to access services from themselves, but everything is in the same place in an 800-meter vicinity, and those are what care blocks is. So the main driver of the care system is time poverty, because we do believe that is one of the main drivers of gender inequality. And if we don't redistribute care, then there's not going to be and if we don't give time for women to rest and time to finish their studies and time to engage in personal care, it's very difficult to reach an equitable and city. And also, it's going to be practically impossible if we don't redistribute care to have a recovery, a post-pandemic recovery in which the gender gap is not increased but decreased.
Okay. Thank you very much. This notion of time poverty, I think it's very interesting to address this issue at a local level. Are there any questions? Maybe a bit loud. Yes.
You can come here if you like. Perhaps it would be better. I don't know if the micro is functioning. No, it's there. Okay. Okay, fine. The questions?
Thank you. I would like to know the relationship that women and gender equity.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm a master's student from Politecnico di Milano in urban planning, and I would like to know which for you is the relationship that women and achieving gender equity has with the public space. And by public space, I mean streets, squares and elements of the city like that, not just in terms of physical elements that need to be added in the street, but also the meaning and the symbolical meaning that public spaces have for achieving gender equity.
Is that for me or is that for someone else?
Yeah, it's maybe for you because you already did something, but in general, which are the study that you do in this sense?
I will just say 2 words just on our example in Bordeaux. We've worked a lot on schoolyards, because we've discovered that schoolyards, they were conceived, they were built mainly for little boys, no? And this notion of having the main parts and the centered parts dedicated to activities that are mainly that mainly concern boys, and the little girls, they were just around, you know, there was this symbolic problem, and that we are now implementing a plan to change that, to rearrange our schoolyards. We are also doing that as for climate change issues, but at the same time, we have this gender criteria to arrange that.
So definitely the relationship between public space, not only built thinking of women, but also the role of it for women. I think it's that double way that it should be approached. And so let me take you back to the care blocks and why we think it resolves it right there, because we're precisely not seeing care blocks as one building, but as a few buildings and public space in which, if we introduce care as a guiding principle of urban planning, then we can have more equitable cities. So what we did is, in our master urban plan, we included in our principles having not only the right of cities for women, but also the principles of safe cities, which is your point on including more lighting and access infrastructure, but also the idea of what are the services and the way the city should be planned to reduce the care burden. And for instance, our master urban plan plans to do 45 care blocks in the next 12 years as a way of designing cities, the 15 to 30-minute cities in which everything is organized around care needs, as a way for urban structures to feed and reduce gender inequality.
Just another question, and then Elise. I think Elise wants, yeah, Elise. You can react, of course, before taking that question.
Thank you. Just a quick comment regarding Bogota's experience. I think that your city is actually addressing an issue so far dealt with by either sorority networks or, as we can see sometimes in France, local female entrepreneurs trying to offer new services for women to be able to deal with this time issue that they meet. But I think that this local government's action is really, really important, and that's the kind of experience we would like to have shared with our gender group, because we need tools to actually do that. And we know that it's a budget, but that's also a way to make people realize that it's mainly a women issue. So this example is really, really good. Thank you very much. And so I'm not going to ask you right now how much it cost and how you dealt to mechanically do it, but so that's something we could discuss later. And regarding the type of actions that can be done by cities to work on this urbanism, taking women's roles into account, whether it's walking with a stroller on the pavement or how to get from one point to another. There's also the question of visibility. When I say visibility, we here in Tours, the city I'm deputy mayor of, we have this program that we built with the citizens. It's a co-construction program, which is called La Rue est à nous aussi. The streets are ours too. And it was a way to ask citizens to submit women's names, local but international women, famous women's names, so that we can use those names, and there is a public voting and a selection committee to pick which name will be used for all the new streets in Tours, because there is just 4% of the cities that carry women's names, and we want to change that because we need identification. We need people to know that women have been creating history too, and we need those role models. So making them visible in public space is also a way, you know, to inscribe them in our, you know, urban landscape. That's different from transports, but I think we need all that, like maybe naming, you know, tram or subway station with women names.
Thank you, Elise. So just another question, a short one, and then we will give the possibility for UCLG. Yeah, I have the French, sorry.
Thank you. I'm Eva, a master's student at TU Berlin for urban management. And I was very interested in the gender equality and budget tracker that you mentioned. And I was wondering if you could give a little bit more insight, like what kinds of indicators would you suggest be included or are included, and have there been any major surprises, I guess, when that's been evaluated in the long term?
So very quickly, it was implemented last year. So it was built last year with the help of UN Women, actually, and we're implementing it. So it was built last year and we're starting to implement it this year. But the whole purpose is the difference of just tracking whether money is spent in programs for women or whether that money is actually closing a gap. Let me give you an example. It's not the number of, say, public lamps that are built or installed in the city, but are they installed in those places we've identified as the most unsafe places for women? So it's not the number of ramps, for instance, going back to strollers, right, which Elise was mentioning, but it's, are those ramps in sidewalks being built in areas close to schools, hospitals, and areas that are, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not paying attention to the computer camera. So probably you're just seeing my elbow the whole time. Apologies. And so it's seeing whether the infrastructure, for instance, that's built is really addressing a previously identified gender either gap or necessity. So those ramps, sometimes the immediate response of, this might sound not very nice, but traditional public officers that've been, right, public officials that have been in public office for 20 years, their immediate response is, oh no, we need to build ramps all over the city. There can't be any targeting, any specific targeting, or light posts have to be all over the city, which is true, but that doesn't close gender gaps, because if we're not prioritizing those areas that are most commonly accessed by women or reported as more insecure or of greater access, then we're not closing gender gaps. So that would be a difference in the type of indicators, not only the number, but where.
Thank you very much. I truly believe that this question of indicators is a key challenge in our local policies, and we must work together to find the right indicators. And that's actually one of the main tasks of our gender work group with Elise in. So now I will maybe give the possibility to UCLG to maybe show present us some perspectives at the international level. Julia Monroe.
Thanks very much. Dear local leaders, participants, and colleagues, it's really an honor to speak with you today on behalf of United Cities and local governments and the local and regional governments constituency. So an intersectional gender equality agenda is really at the foundation of our work at UCLG. And as such, UCLG is really committed to enabling and promoting the global feminist municipal movement, mobilizing our equality-driven constituency to foster territories that are inclusively gender sensitive and put care for people and for planet, for communities and ecological systems at the center of policy and action. And I think we've really seen amazing examples today already of this global feminist municipal movement in our amazing panelists and local leaders. So just as feminism is not just about women, feminist municipalism is not just about women's rights or the number of women in power. It's far beyond this. It's about a new type of society where all living things are valued. And it's about a new way of governing, a different way of governing to what we've seen before. And a sort of a type of leadership that is based on empathy, on proximity, peaceful collaboration, care, and well-being. And we've had so many amazing examples today of that. The feminist municipal movement strives to increase the meaningful participation and decision-making power of marginalized groups, including women, the LGBTQIA+ community, indigenous communities, people of color, youth, older persons, persons with disabilities, and feminist leaders, in order to ensure our cities and territories can be built for all those who wish to inhabit them. The feminist municipal movement, as you've already heard today, advocates for stronger local public service provision and the valuing of care work, as historically care work has not only been unpaid, but also undervalued. The feminist municipal movement calls for giving value and recognition to this care work and emphasizing that. And by doing so, it calls for the redefinition of essential services by incorporating the right to the city as universal citizenship and as a building block for peace and well-being in all our cities and regions. Furthermore, since its origin, our municipal movement has been a champion of the transformative power of city diplomacy, which is also central to today's discussions. Municipal international cooperation and decentralized cooperation, international local government diplomacy, and mutual assistance, and so on, are a key contribution to multilateralism that has shown to be vital for the construction of a more peaceful and just world, to foster solidarity and advance the rights of communities. This new type of leadership and governance that we see promoted by so many leaders of this feminist municipal movement around the world is testament to the fact that through promoting dialogue, cohesion, and care, local and regional governments can continue their long history of international solidarity and ensuring peace building is a foundation and a value deeply embedded for cities, as well as a backbone for thriving, caring, sustainable, and creative communities. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you very much for your participation. Now, a few words of conclusion by Lorenzo before, I think, leaving, because there is another session just after.
Thank you very much for the floor. Thank you very much to all the participants for this inspiring conversation. Well, there is a lot that I think we all have a lot of takeaways, and I will try to be extremely brief. First point, cities can and are making a difference. This is great. This is linked to a great leadership, and this benefits not only women, but we can speak about urban well-being as being upgraded thanks to this kind of actions. Just a point, we are unfortunately still talking about a challenge that is ongoing. We have very positive exceptions that have been presented, but unfortunately, as highlighted, the general approach is that of implementing activities that are gender neutral. Gender neutral is not enough. Of course, we need gender mainstreaming. Otherwise, we have these inequalities that still hinders, that still blocks the full well-being of cities. And today we have discussed these three great drivers that we own today. We have the driver of the participation of our local actors that generously contribute in shaping and guiding and have a co-responsibility of this innovative action. We have the municipal movement, the municipal feminist movement, as highlighted by Julia, that is spreading, is doing this advocacy that Elise also mentioned as being so important. And finally, as Ms. Aki Sawyer mentioned, also it's important to add the levels of national government, and this is a multi-level governance. Multi-level governance is something in progress. Also, we have an opportunity as the World Urban Forum to have different actors all together collaborating, and this is definitely something we can provide us with some optimism. Well, I think that in a nutshell, by joining forces, we can all contribute to this development towards a more equal, just, green, resilient, and sustainable urban metabolism. Thank you very much to all of you.
So we'd like to ask all the participants, so all the speakers online, to stay because we would like to take a photograph with the speakers here. So we'll try. So thanks to the technicians to have the screen, all the screen visible if it's possible. So thank you, and, thank you. Okay, and great applause for the technicians because they did a great job. And I think that thank you for the rages. So I thought just so now, thank you too, and thank you for you all, and have nice World Urban Forum. Okay, thank you very much.